Montana Territory, early spring of 1883, the wind carried smoke across a broken sky as Naomi Prescott stepped off the stagecoach and stared at the blackened remains of what was supposed to be her new beginning. The farm was gone. Charred posts stood like grave markers. The barn had collapsed in on itself, and the house, what was left of it, was a skeleton of scorched beams and crumbling stone. Her trunk sat beside her in the dirt, untouched by the fire but heavy with the weight of everything she had left behind in Ohio. Naomi's gloved hands trembled as she clutched the folded letter from Aaron McKinley, the man who had promised her marriage, land, and a fresh start. He had written of apple trees and quiet mornings, of needing a wife, of kindness. But now there was no Aaron. Just ash, silence, and the sharp smell of ruin. She stepped forward, her boots crunching on cinders, and caught sight of something near the well. A wagon wheel, half buried in soot, a child's doll, scorched but intact, lay beside it. Naomi pressed a hand to her mouth. A voice came from behind her. "You should not be here." She turned sharply. A man stood by the edge of the road, tall and lean, his hat low over his brow, a rifle slung behind his shoulder. Dust clung to his coat and boots, and his eyes, gray, sharp, steady, watched her like someone used to danger. "I'm Naomi Prescott," she said, her voice catching in her throat. "I was supposed to marry Aaron McKinley. Is he, did he?" The man's jaw tensed. "He is dead, along with his 2 children. The fire took it all, was not long ago." Naomi blinked hard against the sting in her eyes. "I was his mail-order bride. I came all the way here to start a life with him. What am I supposed to do now?" He stepped closer, removing his hat. "Name's Elias Rowe. I was working fence lines up north when it happened, came back too late to stop it." "Were you his friend?" "No. Just passing through, took up work where I could. I stayed a few nights in the bunkhouse. That was before." His voice was low, even. "No one claimed the land after, no kin left, just ghosts." Naomi looked around. "Then why are you still here?" Elias glanced toward the mountains. "Not sure I am. Just been helping where I can. You should not be alone out here." "I do not have anywhere else to go." She gripped the edge of her shawl. "I sold everything to get here." Elias looked at her, really looked then at the dirt on her hem, the tired slump in her shoulders, the brave way she stood among ruins. He nodded once. "I will help you rebuild," he said simply. Naomi blinked. "Why?" Elias turned back toward the road. "Because someone should." They spent that first night in silence. Elias cleared a patch of land near the old corral and set up a canvas lean-to. Naomi sat by the fire, hands curled around a tin cup of weak coffee, watching flames dance in Elias's eyes. He did not speak much, but he moved with purpose and care, always watching the horizon as if something might come out of it. She asked once, "Where are you from?" He poked the fire with a stick. "Nowhere I remember." She waited. He said nothing more. Over the next few days, Elias worked from dawn to dusk. He salvaged beams from the barn, split fresh wood from nearby pine, and laid the foundation for a small cabin. Naomi helped where she could, hauling water, stacking stones, and cooking over open flame. Her hands blistered, then toughened. Her heart, too. One morning she found Elias sitting on the porch frame, staring out at the field. "I found a corner of the root cellar that was not burned," she said, setting down a basket of dried beans. "Some of the jars were sealed tight." He nodded. "You are tougher than I figured." Naomi gave a tired smile. "I was raised by a blacksmith. I learned early not to wait on anyone to save me." Elias looked up at her then, really looked. "Still, you did not run. Most would have." "I thought about it," she admitted, "but something about this place. I do not know. Feels like it needs someone to stay." He nodded slowly. "Maybe you are right." That night the wind picked up, sharp and cold. Elias offered her the lean-to and took the ground by the fire. She argued, but he shook his head. "You already lost too much, Naomi. Let me give you this much." By the end of the week, the cabin walls stood chest high. Naomi planted turnips in the edge of the garden plot. The land still held heat in the soil, still breathed. One afternoon, as she knelt in the dirt, Elias came over and crouched beside her. "I have been thinking," he said. She glanced at him. "About what?" He hesitated. "You came here to be a wife, to build a life. That part, it does not have to be gone, not if you do not want it to be." Naomi's hands stilled. Elias met her eyes. "I do not have a past to offer." No name worth anything, no promise of safety, but I will work beside you, I will build this with you. Her breath caught. Are you asking me to marry you? He nodded once. I am. Naomi looked at him for a long time. Sweat streaked his brow, dirt marked his shirt. But his gaze was steady, and something in it whispered of steadiness, of a heart not quick to speak but slow to leave. She stood and brushed the soil from her skirt. I did not come here looking for love, she said, but I think maybe it found me anyway. Elias stood too. Is that a yes? She stepped closer, her hand reaching for his. Yes. And as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting the valley in gold, Elias Rowe and Naomi Prescott stood on the edge of a new life, two strangers brought together by fire and fate, ready to rebuild not just a home, but something far deeper. The wind shifted warmer by the second week of April, carrying the scent of thawing pine sap and the first hints of wild chokecherry blooms. Naomi rose early each morning, her skirts damp with dew before the sun finished climbing over the eastern ridge. The cabin stood roofed now with a stone hearth Elias had shaped himself. Smoke curled from it each dawn, thin and pale against the cold blue sky. She was kneading dough the first morning Elias called from the edge of the field. Naomi, he said, lifting his hand. We're due for horses. She wiped flour onto her apron and stepped outside. Where do you intend to find them? Couple ranchers down near Willow Creek. I traded some work last fall for a claim ticket on a mare and gelding. Meant to collect before snow set in, never did. She looked at the trail beyond the slope. That's a day's ride. Closer to 2 there and back, I'll leave at first light. She studied him. His coat hung looser lately, patched at the elbow with canvas she'd stitched. A man worn thin by labor but steady, always steady. I'll pack you bread and jerky, she said. You'll need both come nightfall, he nodded. If weather holds, I'll be back before Sunday. Elias left before dawn. Naomi watched his figure shrink into the hills, the road swallowing him like a long breath held too long. The cabin felt larger without him there. She cleaned to keep her hands busy, then walked the edge of the garden, checking for sprouts. Shoots of green pushed up through the soil, turnip and cabbage maybe. The sight steadied her. That afternoon, a wagon creaked up the trail. A man rode beside it, older, with a leathered face and a limp in his left leg. He tipped his hat when she stepped out. Name's Lyle Danton, he said. I haul for the mercantile in Anise. Got a parcel addressed to a Miss Naomi Prescott. She nodded, surprised. I wasn't expecting anything. Well, Lyle said, easing down from the bench, someone sent it care of the old McKinley place. Guessin' that's still you? He handed her a small wooden crate with her name inked in a careful hand. She didn't recognize it. Must have been sent before the fire, she murmured, running her fingers along the edge. Could be. World keeps moving even when it breaks. She offered him a jar of preserved onions for his trouble. He accepted with a grateful grunt and drove off slow, dust rising behind him. Inside, she opened the crate. Inside lay a worn book of poems, a spool of blue thread, and a carved wooden hair comb, nothing she had packed herself, but achingly familiar. Her sister Ruth had sent it. Months ago, no doubt, before Naomi boarded the train west. She sat on the edge of the cot, thumb resting along the spine of the book. Ruth had always believed in beauty, even in hardship. Naomi read one page aloud, her voice soft, words falling into the quiet like pebbles into water. By evening, clouds gathered over the mountains. Rain came slow, tapping the roof in steady rhythm. She spent the night mending Elias's spare shirt, the one he wore when the other was too soaked with sweat to dry. The next day she hauled water from the creek and checked the snares Elias had set along the ridge. One held a rabbit, limp but clean. She skinned it by lantern light and stewed it with wild onion and the last of the salt pork. Elias returned near dusk the following evening, coat slick with rain, horses tied behind him, one chestnut, one dapple gray. He looked wearier than she'd ever seen him, but when he saw her waiting by the cabin door, something eased in his shoulders. You made it, she said, barely. River's running high south of here. Thought I'd have to swim the gray across. She stepped closer, reached for the reins. They're good stock. They'll do. They led the horses to the lean-to. She brushed the mare while he rubbed the gelding down, the silence between them warm now, not empty. Over supper he spoke low, voice rough from wind. I stopped by the chapel in Willow Creek. Picked up a paper, she looked up. What kind of paper? He reached into his coat and unfolded it. Marriage license. Minister will ride out next week if we ask. Says he owes me a favor. Naomi touched the edge of the paper. The ink was still sharp, the name spelled clear. I didn't expect you to do that. I told you I meant to build this with you. I don't speak what I don't intend. She folded the license carefully and set it aside. I'll sew a dress, she said. Nothing fancy, he smiled for the first time since returning, not wide but real. You'd be the finest thing I've ever seen, no matter what you wore. They sat long after the fire burned low, the sound of horses shifting outside, the hush of night wrapping around them. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. There was no need for more words. The promise had already been made. The sky was clear the morning Naomi stitched the final hem of her dress. She'd chosen a slate-colored calico, soft from wear, and edged the collar with a thin line of pale embroidery thread blue, like the comb Ruth had sent. It wasn't new, but it was clean, and it was hers. She folded it neatly and laid it across the cot with a quiet breath, the kind that settled somewhere between memory and hope. Elias returned from the creek with his shirt damp from the waist down. He set the pail inside and removed his boots without a word, glancing once at the dress before settling beside the fire. Naomi knelt to stir the porridge, the silence between them calm like the hush before a spring storm, not a threat, but a promise of change. You ever been to a wedding before? She asked, not looking up. Once, he said. I was 13. Winter had just broken. The groom stammered through the whole thing. Bride didn't seem to mind. She smiled faintly. Did it stick, far as I know? They had 3 boys last I passed through. She let the spoon rest. Seems like everyone I knew had something solid to hold on to, a name, a house with walls, even if they didn't like each other much. Solid doesn't always mean steady, Elias said, rubbing his palms together. Some things stay standing because folks lean into them, not because they were built right. Naomi turned then, studying the way the light caught the edge of his jaw. What do you lean into, Elias? He didn't answer right away. The fire popped behind him, a sharp crack in the stillness. Then he met her eyes. Lately. You. The minister arrived by horseback the following day, his coat dusty and his voice hoarse from the trail. He declined coffee but accepted a bowl of oats and a folded chair by the hearth. Naomi offered him a clean cloth to wipe his hands, and he nodded in thanks before opening a slim leather folio and setting it across his knees. Elias had trimmed his beard that morning, the first time since Naomi had met him. She noticed the fresh edge along his cheek, the way his shoulders sat straighter in his shirt. He stood beside her as the minister cleared his throat and began. The ceremony was brief, the words plain. The vows were spoken without flourish, but something in Elias's voice held deeper than ceremony, a quiet steadiness that met Naomi's gaze and didn't falter. When the minister said they could seal it with a kiss, Elias took her hand first. His thumb brushed her knuckles, and when he leaned in, the press of his lips was gentle, reverent. Like he understood exactly what they were building, tender and unshakable. The minister left before sundown, his mare trotting steady along the ridge. Naomi and Elias stood in the doorway long after the dust settled, the hush between them no longer a space to fill, but one to rest inside. That night the wind shifted east and Naomi lit a lantern by the window. The room glowed soft, shadows dancing across the new walls. Elias had brought in the last of the firewood, his shirt collar damp with sweat. He hung it over the chair, then turned toward her. You can take the bed, he said, motioning toward the cot. I'll see to the floor. She stepped forward, hands clasped before her. We're married, I know, and I trust you. He watched her for a long moment. You sure? I wouldn't have said yes if I wasn't. He nodded, slow, then reached for her hand again. They lay side by side that night, not tangled, just near. Her head rested against the curve of his shoulder, and his breath, even and quiet, kept time with hers. Nothing rushed, nothing demanded, Just two people who had chosen the same road and meant to walk it all the way. Days passed, each one stitched into the next like patchwork. Naomi began keeping bees along the southern fence line. Elias had helped her hollow the frames from old barrels. She wore a veil she fashioned from a curtain, and though the buzzing unnerved her at first, she learned the rhythm of it. Learned how to move without panic, how to keep her hands steady. Elias cleared a small trail toward the western ridge where the soil ran darker and held better for potatoes. He whistled sometimes while he worked, low and tuneless, but constant. Naomi listened from the porch, spinning wool on a borrowed spindle from the widow Hensley, who'd ridden out from an ease with a basket of cuttings and stew bones. "You've done something here," the widow had told her, watching Elias drive a post into the ground. "Not many men build with their hands and stay with their hearts." Naomi hadn't answered. She hadn't needed to. One evening, after supper, Elias reached into the cupboard and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. He handed it to her without a word. The ink was faded, the edges curled. It was a stock receipt from Idaho Territory, signed by a man named Tom Rowe. "My father," Elias said. "He ran freight, hard man, didn't stay long in one place." Naomi read the paper again. "You've never mentioned him." "Didn't know if I should. He left when I was 5. I didn't see him again until I was nearly grown. By then, I wasn't sure if I wanted to." She folded the paper carefully. "What happened to him?" "Died in a mining camp outside Virginia City. Never owned a thing that didn't fit in his saddlebag." Naomi reached for his hand. "You're not him." "I know," he said, voice low. "But sometimes I wonder if a man's shadow grows longer than his name." She pressed his fingers to her lips. "You've already given me more than a name." Outside, the moon rose full and golden, casting the yard in soft light. Naomi leaned into Elias's side as they sat on the porch bench he'd carved from pine. The air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. Somewhere up the ridge, a nightbird called once, then went quiet. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to prove. Only the comfort of nearness and the slow, steady promise of a life being made together. By mid-May, the first brood of chicks had hatched in the hollowed crate Naomi had lined with wool scraps. She woke to their peeping, thin and insistent, beneath the cot, and crouched to check them while the morning was still blue at the edges. Elias had gone out before sunup to mend the wire fence along the north slope. He'd taken the dapple gray, carrying a coil of barbed line and a sack of grain for the ride back. She reached in and touched the downy neck of the strongest chick, then set a shallow tin of water beside them. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and pine soap, the kind she'd boiled last week with lye and tallow after trading extra eggs for ash at the Hensley place. When Elias returned near noon, his hands were scraped raw across the knuckles. "There's a bull roaming too close," he said, unbuttoning his cuffs. "Not one of ours." Naomi poured cool water from the crock and handed him a clean rag. "Whose is it?" "Brand's unfamiliar. Might have drifted from Dakota cattle. Will it cause trouble?" "Not if I can steer it off." "But it's mean-eyed." She watched him wind the cloth around his palm. "You've handled worse." He looked at her, a hint of weariness in the line of his mouth. "That's true." He didn't say what else he'd seen that morning, but he didn't need to. His silence had grown familiar, not absence, but wait. She'd learned to read the spaces he left open like the unspoken warnings in a weathered sky. They ate together under the awning, shade falling in a soft patch over the table Elias had built from leftover planks. Naomi handed him slices of cold roast and a heel of bread. "You ever think about going back east?" he asked, chewing slow. She shook her head. "There's no back for me, just forward. Even if this hadn't happened, the fire, I mean." She rubbed her thumb along the rim of her tin cup. "Even then, I was already halfway gone before I left." "People expect you to stay the same when they've already decided who you are." Elias set down his knife. "What did they think you were? Too old to marry, too plain to notice, too stubborn to be worth the bother." He leaned back, elbows on his knees. "They were wrong about every part of that." Naomi looked toward the pasture where the chestnut mare grazed. "What about you? You ever think about leaving this place behind?" "I wouldn't know where to go." "That doesn't mean you wouldn't want to." He was quiet a moment, then said, "I used to." I thought if I kept riding, I might find something that felt like mine. Turns out I had to stop moving to find it. She turned toward him. And have you? I have now. That night the wind came in low from the west, stirring the grass in long, slow waves. The chickens settled early. Naomi stood behind the cabin, watching the stars come out one by one as Elias finished hammering a brace along the root cellar. His shirt clung to his back from heat, and the wood gave a sharp crack as the nail drove home. "You've been working straight since morning," Naomi said. "Come sit." He wiped his brow with his sleeve and joined her on the bench, dust still clinging to his boots. "I found something earlier," he said, reaching into his coat. "Buried near the edge of the field." She took the object from his palm, a tin locket dented on one side, the hinge rusted but still intact. Aaron's, maybe, could be his daughter's. There's a name scratched inside, Clara. Naomi opened it carefully. Inside was a lock of pale hair pressed flat against the metal. "She must have dropped it before the fire," she murmured. Elias sat back, watching the horizon. "You want to keep it?" "No, I think I'd rather bury it proper. Near the poplar," he nodded. "I'll help." They dug a small hole just past the garden plot where the soil was soft and the roots didn't crowd the spade. Naomi wrapped the locket in a linen scrap and lowered it in with both hands. Elias covered it without a word. When it was done, they stood side by side, heads bowed, until the stars fully claimed the sky. Inside the cabin, Naomi lit the oil lamp and set it low. Elias leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, his eyes following her as she moved. "You ever think of children?" he asked. She looked up, surprised by the question's quietness. "I used to. And now, I don't know, I suppose I stopped letting myself believe it was possible." He stepped forward, slow and sure. "I think about it, not the way some men do, wanting someone to carry their name, more like wanting a reason to teach things that matter, how to build something that holds, how to stay." She reached for his hand. "I'd want that too, if it happens. If it doesn't, we have this." He nodded once, then leaned in and kissed her forehead, his hand steady at the small of her back. The lamp flickered as the wind pressed against the shutters. But inside, the warmth held. And for the first time, Naomi felt not just sheltered, but rooted, not just chosen, but truly seen. The first thunder of summer rolled across the mountains in early June, distant and low like a wagon wheel crossing loose stone. Naomi stood at the edge of the field, hoe resting against her thigh, and watched the clouds build in slow, heavy layers. The air had thickened, and even the bees moved slower. She wiped her brow with her sleeve and glanced back toward the cabin. Elias was oiling the hinges of the barn door, crouched low beside a tin can he'd warmed on the stove. His shoulders bore the sun's deep bronze now, and the back of his neck had darkened where his collar left skin exposed. He didn't look up when she approached, but his hand stilled at the sound of her boots. "There's a split in the far fence post," she said. "Top rail's leaning. I'll mend it tomorrow," he answered, brushing dust from his knee. "Storm'll hit before I can set it right." She nodded, then crouched beside him, fingers grazing the rim of the tin. "We'll need to bring the hens into the lean-to. Sky's turning. I'll hitch the mare. You see to the stove, make sure we've got enough kindling in." They moved without hurry, but not slow either, in that sure-footed rhythm born from knowing weather and each other. Naomi gathered the chickens, one at a time, and settled them in straw-lined crates beneath the awning. Elias secured the windows with lengths of pine he'd cut weeks ago, just in case by sundown the storm broke. Rain pounded the earth in sheets, and the sky lit pale with summer lightning. They sat inside, close to the hearth, the fire crackling low. Naomi stitched a patch across the shoulder of Elias's work shirt, the fabric still holding his warmth. He watched her hands move, unmoving himself, elbow resting on his knee. "I saw a man I knew once," he said, voice softened by the wind at the shutters. "Back when I worked cattle near Helena. He'd married late 40 maybe, lost his first wife to fever, swore he'd never try again." Naomi kept sewing, but her eyes met his. "He changed his mind," she asked, "found a woman who didn't ask for what he'd lost. Only what he still had left to give." She tied off the thread, bit it with her teeth, and set the shirt aside. "That how you feel, like you've lost something?" He leaned back against the wall. I used to think the parts of me that drifted off couldn't be gotten back, but they're not gone. You helped me remember them. Naomi crossed the space between them and sat beside him, her hand sliding into his without hesitation. You've helped me build something I didn't think I'd ever have, she said, voice low. Not just a roof. A place where I don't have to wear someone else's shape. He turned his face toward hers. You never did. The firelight flickered against his jaw as he leaned in and kissed her, slower than any time before. It was deliberate, a choice made and remade, and she answered it with her whole self. Later, rain still whispering against the roof, they lay beneath the quilt she had pieced together by lantern light over the past weeks. Elias's breath was warm behind her ear, one arm wrapped around her waist. She closed her eyes, the weight of the storm outside nothing compared to the stillness they'd found together. The next morning, the world smelled new. Damp earth, pine needles, and the faint sweetness of crushed grass underfoot. The creek ran fuller but not wild. Naomi stepped barefoot into the yard, letting the hem of her shift brush the wet ground. Elias followed, tugging his suspenders over his shoulders, a biscuit in one hand. He brushed crumbs from his palm. Fence'll need looking to. You said tomorrow, remember? He grinned, subtle and fleeting. It's tomorrow now. They walked the pasture together, checking the rail. Naomi held the nails while Elias hammered, their shadows long behind them in the mid-morning sun. When they finished, she sat on the fence and watched him scan the horizon. You ever think about staying for good? She asked. He turned toward her, wiping sweat from his brow with the crook of his arm. I already have. That afternoon, a letter arrived. Lyle Danton brought it, same as before, though this time he stayed for coffee and a plate of cornbread. Naomi read the letter aloud after he left. It was from Ruth. She'd remarried to a widower with kind eyes and 4 grown sons, and enclosed a pressed violet between the pages. Naomi folded the letter with care and set it beside the wooden comb Ruth had sent months ago. She's well, Naomi said. I'm glad for her. You want to visit? Maybe next year, she said, reaching for his hand. But not yet. The seasons turned. The crops came in slow and stubborn, but they came. Bees gave enough honey to fill 2 crockery jars. The mare foaled in August, a colt with a white blaze and strong legs. They named him Alder. That winter, Elias carved a cradle from pine. He didn't say why, but Naomi knew. Her body had changed in ways neither of them spoke aloud, but both understood. She sanded the cradle's edge smooth and lined it with wool she'd spun through early snow. The day the child was born, the wind blew hard from the east, but the cabin held firm. Elias stayed outside until Ruth arrived. She'd come west after all, riding the last leg in a freight wagon. Naomi clutched her sister's hand and breathed through the pain, the fire beside her blazing bright. Their son was born at dusk, red-faced and angry, fists curled tight. Naomi wept, not from pain, but from the vastness of it, the life they had built, the life they had made. Elias held the child with both hands, head bowed low. He's strong, he murmured. Naomi, weak but smiling, whispered, like his father. They named him Calder, after the high river that ran cold and clear through the western slope where Elias had once planned to leave and now had rooted himself instead. They built the years slow, one day laid against another, never rushed, never wasted. Spring came, then another. The cabin grew 2 rooms now, a porch with a swing. Naomi wrote letters to Ruth each Sunday, and sometimes Ruth wrote back with pressed flowers and stories of grandsons and laundry hung in rows. Elias taught Calder the shape of trees by their bark and how to listen for weather in the hush before wind. Naomi taught him to read and to keep bees and to carry silence like a skill, not a burden. In time they grew gray. Not quickly, not with sorrow, but with the soft dignity of people who had lived fully. Elias's hands stayed calloused, Naomi's hair turned silver at the temples, and Calder grew tall and sure with eyes like both of them. They sat often on the porch swing, her head on his shoulder, his thumb tracing idle circles on the back of her hand. You still glad you didn't turn back? He asked once, voice low. She watched the sun settle past the edge of the ridge. Every day, they never left the land. There was no need. Everything they'd ever wanted was already there, built with weathered wood, bound by quiet trust, and kept by the rhythm of love that asked for nothing but stayed through all things. And so they remained, together in the house they had raised from ashes, side by side through harvests and winters, their love as steady as the mountains beyond.